Welcome to Equipping Leaders, a podcast where I share and discuss resources, tools, and information to equip leaders to build creative, cohesive teams through culture and leader development. Welcome to the Equipping Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Natasha, and today I am sharing a conversation that I had with writing coach Lauren Licata on leading a community of writers, how to view impact, and the power of leveraging your creative pursuits. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm very excited about our chat. Can I have you start by introducing yourself and telling us your style of coaching and guiding people?
Absolutely. And first of all, just thank you for having me. I feel quite honored to be here today. And also just to sit and chat about things that I love so much and that I know that you share also. It's nice to take a beat from all of it and discuss like what it is that we do. So I'm Lauren Licata of Paperbacks & Co. And I would say that the essence of what I do and the group sessions that I host is really about holding space for women to tap into their creativity, tap into their creative confidence that already exists, but is often either buried or, by certain blockages, or is often even just bulldozed over by errands, priorities, life, etc. So I would never say that what I do is this very didactic instruction in any way. I feel that humans are naturally creative, and so they don't really need to be taught how to. It's really more about providing a container and also the support system so that creativity can thrive, I think.
I love that. And I really love that you said the whole piece about holding space, because I think that intellectually we think through it and we're like, yeah, I know I need to sit down and write, or I need to create these spaces for these different things that I say are important to me. But life happens, and sometimes we do need that extra person, that external person specifically. And I know that's what coaching is all about. A coach is a soundboard and a co-creator, and it's their job to create space so that you can figure things out or kind of get to the core of what you need to in that time. So I love that you put it like that.
I definitely would say that our society doesn't always value creativity. It's not the most quantifiable thing in the world. So I do often feel like the explanation of what I do comes off as really simple, and I get these the most common responses I get are like, how do you teach someone to be creative? And then I say I don't, and people get really confused. Or people just don't understand what it would mean. Like, why would I want to be creative? Like, hobbies aren't really, that's something I did when I was a kid, maybe. But I do think you touched on something really great. I actually heard somewhat recently someone describe and this woman did what any great mentor does, which is to ask the right questions. And I was like, yes, that is such a great description of what it means to be any sort of coach, guide, leader. And sometimes I think we can bristle at those words, but sometimes it really is just as simple as providing space and asking the right questions, et cetera, helping lead people to the things that are already within them,
Exactly. Yes. I love that. And again, that is the essence of coaching, right? And when people think that there's something external to them, they want this kind of checklist, like, how do I get that? How do I become those things? But when you can show people through thoughtful questioning or creating space that they have the answers, I think that's the most empowering thing that you can do for another person, whether you do it in an official or unofficial capacity.
Knowledge is power. We can take things that are these weird, amorphous, shape-shifting things like creativity. What does that even mean? Can anyone even define that? And to just kind of all band together and even admit that it's not always easy. It's not just like sitting out in a field with a paintbrush. It is sometimes this much more anthropological unearthing of this thing within you.
And in one of the sessions a few weeks ago, we were talking about like creativity, and how some of those skills of creativity are actually the same skills that we use in a lot of other things. So sometimes with creativity, there's a certain amount of open-mindedness or a certain amount of discipline or a certain amount of focus. I do hear people when I say that I need this like creative time, they do kind of like that doesn't sound productive. Like I'm just over here just painting murals of a political dialogue that's just in my head, like, or whatever. But really, it's like honing these very specific skills that can be used across all areas of our lives.
Absolutely. Yeah, I could not say that better myself. I almost would compare it to kind of the way that we go to a yoga class, right? Like yoga is meant to be this sort of microcosm of what life feels like. Yeah, it's an hour on the mat, but really what it is a place to learn how to breathe through the struggles, how to push through, how to, maintain your zen, essentially. And then you take what you learn on the sweaty mat and you take it out into the world. And theoretically now you can also breathe and find your zen in other circumstances. Is it always easy? No, this is not this like perfectly applicable thing, but that's why it's a yoga practice. We don't say, oh, I'm perfectly yoga'd now. No, it's a practice. It's an ongoing life lesson. And yeah, I think the things that we exercise in creativity, such as following our curiosity and being comfortable being vulnerable and pushing past those struggles and being courageous, I absolutely think lend to a much richer life. They are qualities that lead to a really beautiful life. Becoming a more curious, courageous person who can sit with vulnerability a little bit is something that can help our relationships thrive. It can help just our day-to-day life. Like, what type of human are you on a vacation now that you're more curious and courageous than before? These are applicable in so many areas of life.
So you mentioned that you are the founder of Paperbacks & Co. So could you tell us more about that, what it is, and what type of amazing things you do, which I can also attest to?
I love it. Paperbacks & Co., which stands for & Company. So community is like a huge part of this from, the beginning, is what you would call an all-woman writers cohort, which maybe is just as hard to distinguish as the name. We are essentially a group of women writers that meets up virtually, not just because it's COVID, but because writing is something you do like hunched over a laptop in your house type thing. We're a group of women writers that meets throughout the week, actually. I see most people in the group more than one time per week on average. We have events where we get our writing done, and we hold ourselves accountable to inching closer to these goals that we have. We are constantly navigating the creative process together in these sessions. It's quite hairy. And so it helps to do it collectively. And also we're also just a group that pools our successes, our struggles, and our strategies along the way. It's like a really positive sort of hive mind in that sense. What inspired it was actually just a very genuine desire on my part as a woman writer in the middle of a global pandemic to actually finally dedicate myself to my writing, which I think is something that I've been wanting to do for decades. I was someone who had a quote unquote creative career. And so I constantly had this like creative cachet to everyone around me when I actually didn't feel that a bone in my body was creative. And I know that there's so many of us who dream of more creative lives. I also wanted to really embrace the identity of a writer. I wanted to actually utter the words, I am a writer, I am an artist, I am a creative. It's something I now know I'm not alone in thinking, And finally, I would just say, I think there was this desire to really transform what is, and I'm sort of speaking of the craft of writing at large here, but like what is typically this kind of solitary, potentially quite nerve-wracking thing, and to use community to turn it into something that is so much more awe-inspiring than it is when you are the aforementioned writer hunched over your laptop at home.
One of the things that I really appreciate about Paperbacks & Co. is that not only are you amazing, of course, but like you said, like that community of all of us coming together and just that, like, you're not alone. when you can come together and you know that other people are also very thoughtfully working towards similar type goals, and being able to, at the beginning and the end of each session, share some of the things that you're working on or maybe some of the struggles, I think for me, that's been really, really impactful for my writing life. And I just remember getting a message from you, and you're like, oh, do you want to join this writing cohort, this power hour? And I was like, maybe, but I'm an adult, Lauren. I know that I need to sit down and write. But in all honesty, I wasn't doing it. I know I wanted to, and I know that I needed to, like for my soul, but I wasn't doing it. And then I found that not only in doing it regularly with the group was it A, getting done, but also B, just how empowering it was for me to do more writing throughout the week, even outside of the group.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I hope, and I feel that it has resonated with other people because it's very genuine. I think it would feel very differently if my initial outreach was like, hey, I'm this multi-published writer. I want to help you do blah, 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 because I don't believe in that type of linear growth when it comes to creativity. I think the most important thing to know about creativity is that it ebbs and it flows. It is a completely non-linear progression. I would be extremely wary of anyone saying that they have complete creative confidence and they will never battle it ever again. It's like, well, maybe you're writing about things that are really safe. It would be my immediate response. And so that's why a group is quite transformative. I genuinely never, ever would have had the idea. I never would have pitched it to a single soul. I don't even think I knew I was missing it quite so much as a writer. But suddenly there is this kind of weird, beautiful silver lining that happened with the pandemic, because suddenly I was considering doing these Zoom events. And I think it would have seemed really weird to say, hey, let's meet up on Zoom, not talk for an hour, heads down, do our writing. It is a kind of peculiar invitation in the beginning, but in actuality, once you start doing it, like you said, you kind of start to see really what an impact it can make on your creative process. And it constantly catches me off guard. I never know when someone is about to say something that is exactly what I need to hear at that moment. And there's something so powerful and empowering about hearing that you're not alone in your struggles. Just being seen as a human can sometimes be such an important thing, but like as this vulnerable, sensitive artist type, trying to put out creations into the world, you want that even more. So I think it's really quite beautiful, because I followed my gut and started asking around to see if anyone wanted to join me in sessions. I genuinely hadn't even named the group. I hadn't in the very beginning, it was so nebulous, and I just knew I wanted to write with other people. I wanted this form of community, and it's really taken off. And I think even I'm still over time unearthing these new ways where I'm like, oh, and also we're doing this, and I didn't even realize it. The other day I sort of had this epiphany about how we are kind of practicing the vulnerability you need in art making in our sessions, to stand up, so to speak, in a Zoom call and to say, hey, I had a really terrible writing day, nothing's flowing, I feel awful, I'm trying to write about past traumas, it's really emotional, I don't even know if I'm up to the challenge. Things like this, you're practicing the art of vulnerability, which means you're going to be that much more vulnerable of an author, and that is going to be palpable in the pages that you write. Did I know that going into this? No. And now I'm sort of starting, to coin and to verbalize a lot of the magic that happens. So it's been a really, really amazing process. And I have to say, it's a good thing to follow our inklings sometimes. You never know where they'll lead.
I appreciate too in the sessions how you are leading the group, but you're not dominating the group. So there really is this sense of togetherness, that I can say something or add something that the group might find valuable, and that, not that would get slapped down or anything, but that it's like a safe space to do that. And like you said, to be able to express that vulnerability in this process. And I think that your authenticity as our leader, in those power hours and in our different workshops and book club and all the amazing things, I think that really, the way that you hold space, I think is what is really impactful for the groups.
Thank you for saying that. It's so nice to hear. I even kind of like bristle when you use the word leader. That's like how I tend to think of it. I'm like, no, it's co-created. I kind of sometimes feel that I'm like the Wizard of Oz, like behind, like that's really a skill. And it's true. The sessions are genuinely co-created, and that's a huge part of it. It would be class, it would be instruction, it would be lecture if I was like leading the whole thing, and that's cool and that has a place. But that's not what we're going for in this community. I do absolutely love that you just said, you were like, not that the group would shoot me down, but I think you illuminate something that is the crux of what we're doing here. Because again, I can't tell you how many times, like trying to explain to my parents or people in my life what I do. I'm like, well, no, I'm not a coach. Well, no, I'm not a teacher. Well, I just guide. I sort of open space. Hold space is not, always mean a whole lot. It's a bit of a vague phrase to some people. But one important thing to understand about creativity, to understand about our physiology as humans, is that we are actually physically hardwired to care so much about what other people think. And so that little kind of slip that you just said, not that the group would shoot me down. And it's like, but actually, our brains do perceive it that way because we're tribe people, right? We humans need communities to thrive. I often say this in sessions as a reminder, but we don't have coats, we don't have sharp teeth, we're not very fast. Like we humans, our thing is to band together. We go fight lions together. That's our thing. So it's important to know what you're working with in your brain. And your brain can't actually delineate between the threat of said lion and the threat of, I'm just in a creativity hangout, just chill. It's on Zoom. Our brains genuinely can't distinguish between the two. And so actually, that's why vulnerability is the big deal that it is. That's why creating is as hard as it is, because we are hardwired to think that if we put something out in the world that people don't like, we're out in the jungle fighting lions on our own. And it's important to know that our brains have not evolved past that. And usually once I explain that, things get a little better, but still, it's one of those things that is evolutionary and not always so obvious to us, like why our bodies and our minds work the way that they do. So thanks for saying that comment, because I think that was so good. We kind of do inside in our brains do feel like the group might shut us down when we share something that's super honest. So
intellectually, you're like, okay, it's not a bear, I'm not being attacked, but you say something, and if people don't like it, or if they say nothing, I think that your brain also starts to tick away at that, like, okay, nobody said anything, so they hate it, right?
Right.
Especially the neuroscience of just, our brain cannot distinguish between a physical threat and the threat of rejection.
Yeah, I mean, the chemical processes that happen in our brains are actually exactly the same. Intellectually, cognitively, we're like, all right, no one's trying to murder me, but we can only do so much. There's so much like subconscious processing. And of course, all of the physiological, like whatever, chemical components have been released. Like we can't always just accept things that are rational, which of course we know at this point. So it's easier said than done.
You said something earlier too that I really liked. The creative process and even a career, whichever way you're looking at it, it's not linear. And just earlier today, I was doing some research on Stephen King, who's one of my favorite writers. I went to his website and on it was like his works. And then I scrolled for 45 minutes because there's just so many things that he's done. But what I really love is he's had some amazing successes, but not everything has been a huge success. So he had things like Carrie and, like kind of our big classic horror tales. And then he did things that were not nearly as popular. And so he could have just kind of fallen off the map if he'd given up on his craft and that. But then we wouldn't have things like Dr. Sleep or any of these. I'm obsessed with that right now. But
awesome. Love it.
But we wouldn't have any of these other things. So if he had thought, oh, this was successful, so this next one has to be successful, and it has to be more successful than the last, then we wouldn't have all of the great stuff that we have from him now. And I think when people get into that in any career, when you think about things in a linear way, it just, the world doesn't work like that anymore. It's not 1920. So you got to get over that. But then also that acceptance of it's going to be different, and I'm going to have to pivot and do these different things and learn a new culture and learn a new way of behaving in the world, and not have these expectations that you're not able to live up to that because it's not real.
And that, I would say, is the case in everywhere in our life, but it's just so much harder to deal with in the realm of creativity, in the sense that I don't get the same quality sleep every night, right? It ebbs and flows. I don't make the best dinner every time. I don't know. These examples are out of left field here, but no one's giving the dinners I make Amazon reviews. So the world of creativity, because you're putting it out into the world, that's why it feels like your talent and what you've produced is being brought under a microscope, because it is, And how many Stephen Kings are out there is something I think about a lot, who haven't published and who haven't put their works out there, because the courage that it takes is so crazy. And understanding that life in general isn't linear, I think, is just always something that's hard. It's not great when our new job, maybe this isn't better than the last. The city I moved to, maybe I actually kind of missed the last one. Maybe my new partner, I don't know. But creativity, when it comes to it, I think, and maybe this is just such a human predilection in general, but we want this really beautiful incline. Always. We want to feel that we're better today than we were yesterday. We want to feel like our knowledge is constantly on the up and up. Our talent is on the up and up. And so it can be a little difficult to accept that that's actually not how creative energy works. It's actually quite out of your control. Some days the aha moment literally wakes you up in the middle of the night, and other days you stare at a blinking cursor and you erase more words than you create. It's something that it's like, I constantly kind of think of it as like this wave that we're surfing together. It's, ebbing and flowing. But when you do it as a group and you see other people eating it on their surfboards too, you're like, okay, so it's not just me, it's just the ocean. Like, I'm going to roll with it. Community solves a lot of problems.
I would agree. And I like also that you said the courage that it takes to really put your work out into the world. Because I know a lot of writers have said this, a lot of people have said this, and it definitely goes for our creative lives. It can go in other areas too, but this concept of it being similar to childbirth in the intellectual effort that's being put into it and the amount of time. And when you're sitting with something and you're researching, and whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction and developing these characters and developing this world, it is consuming in a way that I don't have human children, that I would imagine that process to be, but in an intellectual way. So then you put this thing out in the world and somebody gives it 1 star, and it just is like, I'm sorry, my perfect baby that I've been working on, that I've edited to death. I agree that there is a huge amount of courage putting it out there and accepting that the right people will find it and that the wrong people will find it too, but you need to worry less about that.
I was going to say, it's also important to know the wrong people will find it too, because you'll not only get that 1-star Amazon review, you'll get the reviews that says like, I hate the ending, or like, I hate blah, blah, blah. And you're like, that's not even, did you read the book? I think it's important to know what it means to be a writer and a creator in 2021. Okay, Virginia Woolf did not have to deal with Amazon reviews. Now, she had a whole other bag to deal with of trying to be a woman writer, right? So we all have our own battles to fight here. Some things are awesome, including independent publishing and how that's really opened up opportunities for writers. You don't have to wait for this magical book deal to happen. You can kind of have more creative control. All of this is awesome, but it is sure important to constantly be cognizant of the fact that hiding behind a screen name on the internet, people will take out all sorts of things. And those Amazon reviews are projecting 99% of the time. So if you just happen to give someone a bad ending on a day where they already spilled coffee on themselves in the subway and they already got fired from their job and their girlfriend's upset, you never know. But the point is that it's a whole new level of rejection and criticism from millions of everyday people that just didn't happen before. So I do think that conversations about courage and vulnerability and also just like how you're going to deal with the haters, like these are necessary, and they weren't 10 years, 20 years ago. So it's a very shifting landscape. And that's another reason why I think kind of banding together with other people doing these same things and sharing your experiences and strategies and stuff along the way is so key.
Margaret Atwood, she did a master class on writing. And when she was talking about it, she said, once you've written something and put it out into the world, it doesn't belong to you anymore. It only belongs to you for the time that you're nurturing it. Sometimes somebody else is going to use your words the way that they want to, and it could be exactly what you were aiming for or completely not. And that understanding and that acceptance of that creative process, even if you write nonfiction, again, people are going to interpret it through the lens that is their experience.
Absolutely. And this is true for all artists of any medium. And I have seen it happen for better and for worse. You know, I have known painters and video artists who get these incredible write-ups by an art critic who's like, it's just so amazing about how this animation of trees is really speaking of the Anthropocene. And the writer or the artist is like, I did not know I was doing that, right? And so it can work in amazing ways. People can perceive our artworks in whatever way they want and choose. And sometimes that's incredible. And we have impacts that we never could have even imagined. You know, people have drawn readings of our work that we didn't even necessarily intend, but it's sort of like forces beyond our control because, you know, we're affected by all sorts of things like our socio-political context, our XYZ, and we don't always know. It also, on the worst side, it's something that can be very humbling. That again, just it all kind of circles back to why you do want community support and you do want to really meditate on all of these things and you want to be in a state of readiness before you release things out into the world. And this is not at all like the things that I'm talking about and that we are talking about, like this courage and this vulnerability and like how are people going to read my works? This is not at all a beginning writer thing. This is not a beginning writer problem, right? Like this is for every writer at every stage of their process. I think like there are interviews with Neil Gaiman, who, if you stack up all of his books, it's over 7 feet high. Someone has done this math, who I love this human. And he, such a celebrated author, still has trouble saying like, I am a writer, still has trouble like grasping that identity. And because he's still like, oh, I can be better, I can do more, I'm still a work in progress, blah, blah, blah. I think that is exactly why we have these conversations as artists. Artists have needed like artist guilds and stuff like this from the beginning of time, and not being able to control how people react with all of its beauty and all of its horror is just one of those things that we as vulnerable artists will just always deal with.
And kind of making that correlation again between the creative life and the other aspects of our lives. Any person who's in a leadership position, you say things and you have to communicate it carefully, but you also have to make sure you're communicating it in a lot of different ways to actually get it to land on people the way that you need it to. And so I think that just those correlations between the two and how thoughtful you have to be, but then also kind of have, somebody once called it like gator skin. You have to be a little bit tough skinned when you are putting things out into the world. There is a certain amount too of not listening to the haters. I don't know that that's the right phrasing, but when you are an artist or when you are a leader, you are one person who is putting something out to many people. And so that's one person looking at something that then goes out to 10 up to millions of people. On the flip side, now you have all those people kind of looking back at you through, you know, all these different perspectives. So having a community of people who also understand that and are in those trenches, if you will, with you is very empowering.
Truthfully, the overlapping Venn diagram between artists and leaders, I think is massive. You know, I think we could refer to artists as thought leaders, period. I think that would be a perfect synonym for what it even means to be an artist, you know? Creativity, what that means in general is to produce something where there wasn't before, which requires understanding what context you're in, right? So you understand what things have been created before and what you're going to create that's new. The correlation between that and what it means to be a leader is massive. And I also constantly, actually, to even draw sort of another through line, I also really think that the crossover between being an artist and being an entrepreneur and being a leader, of course, many leaders are entrepreneurs, many entrepreneurs are leaders. That's huge. Also, you know, I think these days it's kind of hard to stay away from any sort of business marketing aspects. We're like all a walking, talking brand. I'm sure we all know this by now, even if you don't think you're a brand. That's your brand. I don't know that enough artists always think of themselves as leaders and or entrepreneurs, when in reality, that's how big it is, the thing that you're doing, right? A leader and an artist share a platform, is really what they share. They also share responsibility for using that platform. And they also share sort of the severity of like, okay, you have this platform, like, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to say? How are you going to impact the people around you? What are you going to use your platform to draw attention to? So I genuinely wish that I would vote for a change to call it a thought leader instead of an artist. I feel like this would be a great semantics, but you know, that's what I care about. The correlations are massive, and not a lot of artists realize it until their careers kind of start taking off, until they kind of start to feel the weight of like, oh, I am impacting people around me. Like I should think about, hopefully they're thinking this, I should think about my platform and what I'm going to do with it.
That reminds me of two things. So one, Senator AOC, she had mentioned, and I'm paraphrasing here, but she said that people think that politicians are leaders. She said, but really we are a reflection of our constituents. She goes, and really it's artists, whether she was talking to a group of drag queens on RuPaul's Drag Race, and she said, you guys are the thought leaders, and she called them that. She said, it's artists, it's musicians, it's all these different people who are expressing what is important in the world right now. And when they're expressing that and putting it out there, then how people respond to that is really what's shaping like current culture and society as it is now. And as politicians, it's their job to then reflect what's important to people. So I really appreciated her humility in that moment, but also with that aspect of like, no, like you guys are driving culture, you're driving society, and that is exactly leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. It is really to be a mirror in many ways. And of course, what a mirror does is to reflect and illuminate, and there is a power there for sure. But I agree with that. Also, just AOC and RuPaul all in one sentence. You're mentioning many of my loves all at once here discussing art. That's just like the trifecta for me right there.
And then the second thing it made me think of was the M. Night Shyamalan movie, I think it was Lady in the Water. In it, when there was one of the characters, M. Night Shyamalan's character was a writer. He was putting this work out into the world. And then at one point he asked the girl's story. He says, you didn't mention me when you were talking about the future. So does someone kill me for what I write? Does someone kill me for these words? And then when she was talking about just the impact that those words have by, sitting on someone's shelf, and generations later it impacts and this person changes the world. So we can all, as writers, you're like, yes, that's my work, it'll be that. But I think that you never know, right? You never know who is going to be so powerfully impacted and when. It doesn't have to be right now. Look at all of the classics that we all love and quote, and you can find L. Frank Baum stuff all over Barnes and Noble right now, right? So you never know when and where your work will be impactful. So there's also this measure of patience, I would say, and acceptance of that process.
I would also say it's really important to think about how you define impact, because I don't feel that impact is necessarily about breadth. I think it's quality over quantity too. Like I can talk about a little piece of stenciled street art that I just happened to see while having one of the most astronomically difficult days of my life, and you see this little thing that someone has stenciled, and it's just like this weird positive. I'm kind of making up a hypothetical here, but you never know what impact you can have. And it's really, in my view, not about the number of people you impact per se, but more about the impact that you have and what the significance is there. You know, in this community, we have so many women who are writing about, and this is all across all genres, you know, but works of fiction, nonfiction, poetry, their blogs, like even, gosh, the beautiful things that these writers are posting on Instagram constantly that I'm just learning from all day long. I actually never liked Instagram until I had this community. I was like, oh, this is great. These are actually wonderful things to scroll through. But I think that we can and should really think about what impact means to us. Why couldn't our goal be to just have one person pick, you know, maybe I'm writing about the really intimate experience behind like the circumstance of the affair and the divorce that's happening in my life. And what if I've been able to change or, inspire or inform one person who is going through the same exact thing with more specificity than any of the other books on the shelf. You know what I mean? So I think like that would be a huge impact. That is actually someone who might change the course of their life based on like things that you share because you've been down this path. And again, this is not just nonfiction. This can be so many things. I have been comforted by more poems than exes probably, and works of fiction. I can name times where a certain series was just this amazing thing going on in my life when things were kind of hitting the fan in other ways left and right. I mean, look at, this is now a bit of a tangent in my personal manifesto at this point, but I have really loved watching how in the pandemic, how everyone has turned to creativity. That was like what flourished. Suddenly everyone has a TikTok and they're making these weird, fun, creative videos. Suddenly everyone's making sourdough. Suddenly like people are picking up hobbies and how many shows did we all watch? How many books did we all read? You know, I know I'm trying to tie this back to impact now. I think it's important to eradicate any sort of notion that we're trying to be like celebrity influencer types. If we end up having that large of a platform, great. That's cool. There will also be weird things that come from that also. So there's that. I think redefining impact is a really important thing to discuss because I guarantee every writer that's working on something, there is one reader in the world that would benefit from what you're writing. And that's powerful. That's all it needs to be. It doesn't have to be more than that, you know?
So there's a person in our group who released a book of poetry recently. I am not a poetry reader, and I bought the book 100% honesty to be supportive. And I was like, this is great. It's going to sit on my shelf. I'm going to tell people about it and tell them to buy it. It's going to be fine. But then I've read it like 3 times now. It is so beautiful and just so impactful. And I messaged that person the other day and I was like, this is just amazing. The way that she writes. It's also about being open to not only who it's going to impact, but also you being open to being impacted and being persuaded. So I like what you said there about the pandemic, where all of a sudden somebody was like, maybe I'm really good at quilling and I didn't know that. But people are trying these different things and just being open to it. And I think that that's part of the whole creative process as well.
Honestly, sometimes feel that there are writers out there who would vehemently disagree with me because they are the types who want to like eat, breathe, sleep, writing. That's all they think about. That's all they talk about. That's their thing. And I truly am the type of human that zooms out and really speaks about creativity at large. That is, I think, a large part of my leadership styles. It's to take the pressure off. Like, it's to simultaneously be like, You should absolutely claim this identity as a writer. Say it. You're a writer. You've actually done this before, right? But at the same time, it's like, but you're also all of these other things. You are a woman and you are creative and you are all of these other things simultaneously. I love that everyone's on TikTok making weird little videos. I love that you buying this poetry book. And sometimes don't forget, it's not even just the words that we publish that have an impact, but it's also like, what are her friends thinking and feeling watching her do this thing? She had a dream. She wanted to publish a poetry book and she did it, and it's out there and people are buying it and she's sharing it. Like that to me, even just being in her orbit right now should be pretty inspiring. And maybe her friends are going to go do quilling and they're going to do something completely different. But this writing, it's always so much bigger than writing to me, and it's creativity, and it's also so much bigger than creativity. And again, I think you're right just to trace this sort of like correlation between what we learn in the creative realm and how we apply that to our life. I think that is such a huge part of it.
Paperbacks & Co. is on Zoom, and there's such a vast community, and you said people are writing all different types of things. So in taking care of others, sometimes the first thing we have to do is take care of ourselves. So how do you go about finding resources for yourself so you can support the community? And how do you go about doing your own self-care?
Yeah, that's such a good question. It's something that I definitely think leaders don't always think much about. I have really glommed onto the phrase that you can't pour from an empty cup. I like that we're having so many more conversations, like collectively, about self-care and about drawing boundaries and all of those things that are involved. And I think that as a human, on a personal level, I think what's really beautiful as a leader is to not just see these self-care things as like, well, if I don't do them, then I can't pour from a full cup. But it is, in that sense, it's true. And so you taking care of yourself so that you can support this community is actually this form of love. I know that sounds crazy, and I like that this community has inspired me to focus more on whatever self-care it is at that time, whether it's rest or whether it's, blah, blah, blah. And that's really cool. I think I have come from such a burnout culture in my past career you couldn't call it healthy at all. And that's pretty, common. I think a lot of our careers bleed completely into our personal lives. And now I'm suddenly in this realm where I want to take care of myself so that I can support this community to my fullest extent. So that is a really cool thing that has never happened to me before, even when I have embodied other leadership positions. So there is something really beautifully symbiotic about, perhaps it's because it's a community that is based upon notions of care. It is specifically a community that's meant to support writers, women, creatives, and therefore that mentality is just intrinsic to everything that we do. And I gotta say, get yourself a community that inspires you to take care of your own self-care. One that even if you're a participant and you're not a leader, that people aren't like, why did you miss today? Or like, why didn't you share out loud today? Or why don't you whatever? It's a really contagious thing to be a part of a community that takes care of each other. That is simply just to say that I'm actually finally on the journey where I am focusing on my own self-care and how I can take care of myself. And when I think about taking care of the group, I think one of the most important things I've learned is that, what the individuals and what the community at large needs is ever evolving. That's why it's something that's so important to think about, especially when we're talking about a group that is actively trying to be better today than they were yesterday. As a leader, I think I am constantly thinking about how I can make a constant effort to continuously be aware of everyone's wants and needs, because it's not the same today as it was a month ago. I think one thing I've noticed that is huge, that is often not as prevalent as I wish it was in a lot of workplaces and a lot of families. I don't know. There's lots of ways that leaders exist, right? But I think a really important job of a leader that I strive to do is to keep communication open so that there is this constant dialogue and members of the group actually feel that there is an an avenue to not only express their wants and needs, but that this leader wants to hear them, that's important to them. And of course, I think it's also just like being nimble and resourceful. And this can be a really fun part of being a leader. It's like, okay, so you've plugged into what everyone wants and needs today as opposed to yesterday, because you kept the communication open and now people are telling you and you're deep listening. And now how do you go out to the world and get those things and bring them back to the hive? We have, for example, a monthly workshop series. Normally, I am a massive planner. This is what I like doing. I am not a type A, I am a type A+. And yet, what I do is never plan the workshops too far in advance. The workshops are just for learning something new related to writing. It's purposefully so vague, and it's something completely different every month. And I strive to do the aforementioned deep listening, which I think is so important, and a skill that requires understanding how to control our attention, which is hard. But it's about listening to whatever is happening in our sessions, hearing what is obviously the root of anxiety and trepidation, and what I'm hearing mentioned multiple times in different sessions and all of that. And so our workshop is decided basically by the group each month. And I don't have connection. It's not like me bringing in experts who I already have connections to. It's like me listening to what these wants and needs obviously are, going out into the world, trying to make those relationships, bring people in and address those things. And then we'll move on and we'll do something totally different next month. It's a constant journey of checking in with the community, checking in with yourself. But I have to say, it's a group that I've never seen that happen to such a capacity. So it's been a really wonderful journey. I'm constantly waver over having to say, hey, I'm a little behind on my DMs. I'll get back to everyone tomorrow. And I will just get flooded. Granted, I'll get flooded with more DMs, but everyone will just be like, that's okay. I want you to rest. And I'm just like, wait, really? Nobody hates me? Like nobody's upset that I'm not immediately responding? So I hope we start to see more communities like this more often, where there is this symbiotic relationship of care between member to member, between member to leader, and all the way around,
You have demonstrated great leadership in your communication. So in caring about us, there are a lot of ways that now, if anything even seems off, whether it's like, oh, you're going to answer DMs later or anything else, we're like, prayer circle, let's get Lauren what she needs. We love her. She is our fearless leader, and we need to keep her going because that's what keeps us going. So I really like that it truly is a community.
I love you for saying that. I'm totally floored and appalled that this is even a thing, because I've never experienced anything like that in, circumstances before. So thanks for saying that.
Where can people find you and learn more about you, your work, and the Paperbacks & Co. community?
Well, we are Paperbacks & Co. on the Instagram, to just fully sound like the elder millennial that I am. We are paperbacksandco.com, and those are really the best ways to reach out. But we also have, monthly preview events where you can check out our programming for free. I like that there are sort of opportunities to test out the community and see what you're getting into and all of that. But yeah, as long as I'm checking my DMs, I'm around that day, and I genuinely love, we're constantly building the community too. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Equipping Leaders. All of the resources mentioned in this episode can be found on my website, natashacheyenne.com. On the website, you can also find a weekly leadership journal entry, a resource page with challenges and downloadable content, a place to sign up for my weekly newsletter, and an upcoming leadership platform full of workshops. You can also follow me on Instagram at novel_Natasha, and on Twitter and Facebook at Natasha Cheyenne. If you'd like to hear more about a specific topic, please reach out and let me know. Join me next week for another episode.